Hey, Witch Mob, we're already on episode 4. Can you believe that? It's so great that you're listening and the audience is growing as people discover the insanity of the Who Is This Crazy Hag podcast. So, who am I? As you know, every week I share a tidbit of information about myself. And since this episode is ultimately about men, let's talk about that for a minute. I live in a small fishing village that is also a famous surf spot. The Point Break is one of the best on the coast, and we have a strong surfing community. Every year, surfers visit from all over the world to hang ten in the tubes. This also means our local surfer boys are hooking up with the visiting surfer girls. At this point, I'd like to just add that these guys are pretty. They have biceps, six-packs, muscles for days, and cute faces. On the surface, they look amazing. Eye candy, if you will, walking around the streets with their shirts off to display their wares. And then they open their mouths and you realise how uneducated and immature they are. It's definitely a bit of a fuckboy culture, and the surfer girls don't care. So the cycle continues. Today's story takes place in Uludeniz, Turkey, in another one of those little holiday resort villages where the local boys have a new girlfriend every 2 weeks because of the rapid tourist turnover. We've all been somewhere like that at least once, right? Before we start, shout outs to Penny and Judith in the USA, Nancy, Heather and Becky in Ecuador, Mendy in Colombia, Jane in Australia, Laura in Canada, Jeannie in Italy, and Isabel in France. Enjoy today's story. Oh, and there might be some swearing. If your ideal vacation includes lounging in hammocks and reading books, Secret Garden could be the perfect spot for you. From observing iguanas to watching hummingbirds, picking fresh tropical fruit from the garden, and walking to the beach, you can do as little or as much as you like. Secret Garden is an eco-house where you can get away from it all and truly relax. Make your booking on Instagram or Facebook at Secret Garden Mompiche. The links are in the show notes. Use the code WITCHPOD for a 20% discount on a 6-day stay. This story is called 3 Steps to Heaven, and it's set in Turkey, in Uludeniz. It's circa 1996, and since I'm recording in the middle of the night, we probably won't hear any roosters, but we'll see how we go. Not making any promises. While travelling around the Mediterranean coast of Turkey one spring, I decided to spend some time in Uludeniz, near Fethiye on the south coast. So in Turkish, Uludeniz translates directly to Dead Sea, but it actually means Blue Lagoon. So it's right on the Turkish Riviera and located at the confluence of the Aegean and the Mediterranean seas. It's actually a beautiful area. Some travellers I met at Olympus had raved about the small coastal village, describing it as a pleasant beach town to hang out if one didn't mind the continuous influx of prepaid female tourists all ravenously seeking a tan, a man, and a plate of fish and chips, in that order. In early April, the tourist season hadn't yet begun. Most of the beaches were still fairly quiet, but the tranquility wouldn't last long. A few days later, a Turkish friend also informed me that Uludeniz was one of the best spots in Turkey to go paragliding. What was paragliding? I had no idea. I nodded vaguely at the information, but didn't absorb it as my mind focused on pristine sandy beaches, the sparkling blue Mediterranean Sea, a golden all-over suntan, and several serene nights of camping at Butterfly Valley. Ready to roll, I took the bus along the panoramic coast to Fethiye and then switched to a dolmuş for the bumpy ride down the hill to the coast of Uludeniz. A dolmuş is a minivan that transports people all over Turkey. It literally means full in Turkish, with people stuffed inside like a can of sardines. This name originates from the calm lagoon located at the northeast end of Belgica's beach, which is sheltered from the open sea by a long spit of white sand, its tranquil waters surrounded by pine forest. When I arrived in Uludeniz, I quickly learned that, aside from sunbathing, one of the main outdoor activities was indeed paragliding. Eager participants in this exciting extreme sport came specifically to this beach from all over the world to fly from the cliffs atop Babadağ. Babadağ, aka Mount Cragus, is almost 2,000 meters high and is called the Father of Mountains. It's actually 2 peaks, but we fly off the highest peak. Chatting to several people I met randomly in bars, cafes and restaurants, I gradually learned more about the international popularity of paragliding among the Uludeniz crowd, including the amateur pilots who flew solo and the tandem passengers of the professional pilots. After being regaled with stories from both pilots and passengers, I concluded paragliding was definitely an activity reserved for birds and for maniacs with a death wish. Leaping from the top of a mountain, attached to a bit of thin silk and a few lengths of string, was not on my agenda. I was certain my desperate fear of heights would keep my feet planted firmly on the ground. Actually, my dad used to say that he never saw the point of jumping out of a perfectly safe aeroplane when it came to parachuting, and at that point in my life, I could see absolutely no point in leaping off a very stable mountaintop. Each day, I was content to watch from the safety of my sunbed as tandem pilots and their passengers descended gracefully from the skies, floating to and fro like streamers in the breeze, their movements elegant and fluid. As they neared the beach, the riders transformed into gangly 4-legged beasts, limbs flaying wildly until they reached the landing spot and ploughed into the soft sand, sometimes sprawling on top of each other and causing an eruption of giggles from observers. Night after night, in the open rooftop bars along the beach, I heard stories from babbling tourists about how exhilarating it had been to fly from a mountain peak as free as a bird. The more inebriated they became, the more elaborate were the stories. A few more beers made the tales outlandish. After several shots, they became boring. It seemed no one else had anything to talk about. Paragliding, para-waiting, para-boring, para-dining, para. It's actually the Turkish word for money. To be fair, I was happy for them, but paragliding wasn't for me. One night I began chatting with a handsome Turkish man who had been sitting on the edge of a circle of increasingly drunken tourists in the middle of a raucous verbal wrestling match. To be honest, they're all handsome. Turkish men are handsome. The ones on the coast, they're tall, dark, handsome, glorious dark eyes, glorious thick hair. Everybody's handsome. Polite as he was, The poor man had been unable to conceal the bored expression plastered across his features. Our conversation deepened, and we gradually edged away from the group. Sitting at a table overlooking the moonlit beach, he became animated and began laughing again. Not long afterwards, a couple of friends joined us, and we laughed and talked for over an hour. At some point during our chat, it occurred to me that he was happy only when he was the center of attention. As it turned out, he was a paragliding pilot. Of course he was. These fucking guys. As he loosened up, he pranced and posed, joking and chortling with me and my friends. There appeared to be only two real qualifications necessary to become a paragliding pilot in Aludinese. One had to be devastatingly charming and also really cute. After less than a week on W.I.T.C.H beach, I could spot a paragliding pilot from 500 meters. I just want to mention that if you're reading the book and you're looking at the word W.I.T.C.H beach, I want to say that Turkish C's are pronounced J. It wasn't just the way they moved, tall and lithe, proud of their sinewy bodies, not shy about showing off well-toned biceps, pulsating quadriceps, and perfectly proportioned washboard stomachs. Tanned from head to toe, they were stunning to look at, with wide gleaming smiles, flawless olive skin, and glints of mischief shining in their eyes. Some of them were arrogant, obnoxious, predator-like creatures, but most of them were polite, friendly guys. Every one of these athletic men reeked of self-confidence, striding proudly along the strip every day to check and pack their wings for a day's work, flying twittering, frightened, overweight package tourists from the mountaintop to the beach. Against all of my initial instincts, I began to think about paragliding. The idea of dangling precariously from the sky, attached to a flimsy length of silk and a mess of multicolored strings, seemed marginally less dangerous if one of these wonderfully gorgeous pilots was attached to my falling body. I found myself wondering what it would be like to fly like a bird from a mountain in the arms of a hunky hero. Catching myself in time, I pronounced that it was probably a normal fantasy, most likely experienced by any woman who lived surrounded by gorgeous men day after day, and that common sense would prevail. I was determined to keep my feet firmly and safely on the ground. Week after week, while working diligently on my tan, I watched from the beach as ecstatic flyers came into land. At times the sky was filled with a confetti of coloured parachutes, whirling and dipping in the chilly thermals coming off the mountain peak. I'd been living in Uludinese long enough to make friends with Jenap and Jamal, a couple of cute pilots who lived nearby. Amongst my new friends, I also counted some of the local business owners and a couple of resident travellers. Most days we exchanged greetings and small talk as we headed for the beach. At night we sometimes met for cocktails in one of the many rooftop bars. The pilots often disappeared to chat up rosy-cheeked girls and were charming enough to convince them to leap off the mountain wrapped in their strong, muscular arms. Many of them succeeded, not only in getting the girls to fly with them, but also in seducing dozens of gooey-eyed tourists. There was never a shortage of package tour girlfriends. They came and went in 2 weeks, spent their money, had the time of their lives, and had nocturnal adventures with Turkish men that they never talked about back home. What happened in Aludinese stayed in Aludinese. This suited the men because the girls were never around long enough to be a pain in their butts. Most of the other travellers I made friends with had already been paragliding with the guys and raved about the experience. During my time on the beach, they tried in vain to convince me to jump off the mountain at least once in my life. As I reclined in my sunbed every day, watching the boys glide around in the sky whetted my curiosity. Swinging uncertainly between my terror of heights and my inquisitive nature, I still wasn't sure and certainly wasn't willing to commit myself to a decision. One night, Janap introduced me to his Adonis lookalike friend Hakan, a handsome Turkish man who escaped the city to come and spend summer on the beach with his friends. We hit it off straight away and chatted about everything there was to talk about. We met every night during that first week, mostly hanging out at our regular bar, sometimes walking on the beach, occasionally going to another bar or cafe for a change. It was halfway through the second week of knowing him when I realized Hakan was also a paragliding pilot who would be working with Janap. Of course he was. Of course he was. They're all fucking pilots. In that time, he had never said a word about what he did for a living. Damn! Had I become one of those giggly package tourist girls? Nah, not possible. I did a quick reality check. I was too sensible to be swept up in the moment like that. Besides, I was keeping my feet firmly on the ground and, despite his good looks and charm, Hakan never became my lover. We got along so well that Hakan and I continued to spend lots of time together. As our friendship developed, I continued to refuse his offers to take me high into the sky. I was perfectly content on the ground. You will be ecstatic in the clouds, he tried to convince me. At night, we were both happy to hang out with other friends and shoot the breeze. Even so, this flying obsession everyone was caught up in began to intrigue me. Hakan didn't talk about what he did during the day, but I knew he loved his job with a passion. At some point, I must have let my guard down for a moment. I don't remember how it happened. Before I regained my sensibilities, I was gazing into hypnotic, sexy eyes and nodding, agreeing to go paragliding with him first thing the following morning. Hakan had somehow managed to talk me into taking the giant leap. He was delighted, clapping his hands like a child, grinning from ear to ear. Somehow I had agreed to fly with him before my common sense regained its normally vigilant composure. Did that last margarita go straight to my head? Honestly, what the fuck was I thinking? Who flies? People don't fly. My friends were thrilled when I finally made the decision to jump. My erratic indecisiveness had been driving everyone mad. They cheered me on, showering me with encouragement. Another round of drinks was bought to celebrate. With any luck, I would be too hungover to fly. Way too early the next morning, I found myself bouncing around in the back of an open four-wheel drive with 8 other yawning passengers who had also lost their minds sometime during the previous night. As the sun appeared over the horizon and began reaching towards the sky, we were jolting over a rough, rocky dirt track up the summit to the dramatic Babadar mountain range. The takeoff point was at 2,000 meters, high above the fishing village of Aludines, with panoramic views of Dalaman and also Patara Beach stretching along the coastline on the other side of the peak. On a clear day, the island of Rhodes can be seen from the top of the mountain. Holy feather fluffers! Am I completely insane? What am I doing here? I searched my fogged brain for an answer. For the life of me, I couldn't remember how Hakan managed to change my mind from a resolute no way to a confident let's do it overnight. I like both my feet on the ground. Now we were here at the point of no return. I pondered this question, trying not to bite my tongue, struggling to remain calm while trying not to ricochet between the wooden bench seat and the metal roof covering the back of the vehicle. My backside felt like it was being pummeled through my head. My head threatened to explode from sheer terror at any moment. Hakan smiled surreptitiously, catching my eye with a cheeky wink. One look into his gleaming melted chocolate eyes and I was a goner. As we rode slowly up the mountain, my bronzed Apollo carefully explained the drill. He went over basic information: how to attach the harness, how to fasten the clips, how to perform thorough safety checks, how to get ready for takeoff, how to communicate once we were in the air, and how to take 3 quick running steps to take off, and how to sit back and relax in the harness once we were flying. Who the fuck is going to relax while you're flying? Seriously, guys. We were also told that since our pilots would be performing most of these tasks anyway, we didn't really need to know that much about any of it. The paragliding company's newest batch of victims bounced up and down on the hard benches while our expert pilot joked that he had done this once or twice before and thought it was kind of fun, so we shouldn't be too alarmed. "It's easy," he said. "Just take 3 steps. That's all there is to it." Yeah, right. It's really that simple. I've heard suicide is painless too. Well, according to the MASH theme song. Anyway. I gazed out at the forest-covered mountain. From time to time the peak came into view. Patches of snow were still scattered around the top. The panorama into the surrounding valleys was wonderful. Each time I tried to lose myself in the surrounds, the jolting vehicle brought me back to earth. I was trying desperately to relax, consciously trying not to think about this random act of madness I was going to commit. Wherever did I get the insane notion I could fly like a bird? I must have been delirious. The nerdy type with thick reading glasses who was carrying an encyclopedia about aerodynamic vehicles asked a zillion questions, the answers to which I really didn't want to know. Altitudes, thermals, spirals, wingovers, radios, blah blah blah. Just the idea of uncontrollably spinning around in the air like a top out of control made me feel dizzy and nauseous. I was preparing my stomach muscles for an undignified vomit out the open side when the 4-wheel drive stopped. After nearly 2 hours of travelling over a former goat track, we finally arrived at the summit of Babadar. Everyone climbed out of the vehicle, stretching stiff muscles, yawning one last time, and shivering against the cold. Knees quivering, I stood taking in large gulps of icy air and trying to stop my head from spinning. It took a few moments to realize I was looking at an incredible view of the Turkish coastline, lined with sapphire blue water and white sandy beaches reaching out for miles in either direction. Suddenly, the real reason for being on this magnificent peak escaped my memory, until Casanova appeared in front of me with sparkling eyes, a bright smile, and a blue flight suit. Once again, cramps of fear shot through my gut. Every muscle in my body tensed. Hakan sensed my fear. He brushed his hand along my cheek. "Trust me," he whispered into my ear. Hot breath caressed my neck, tickling and soothing. I closed my eyes and focused on his light touch warming my skin. "This will be good," he assured me. Hakan's voice could have melted marshmallows. Despite my resistance, I felt my bones turn to rubber. Still unable to open my mouth for fear of screaming in terror, I nodded. His forefinger gently lifted my chin, and he gazed into my eyes. "You'll be fine. I'll take care of you," he smiled. If I hadn't been so terrified, I might have been turned on. Determined not to ruin my hard-won reputation as a recklessly intrepid soul, I was determined not to behave like a possum guts, despite being scared enough to poop my pants. Even though I had only known him a couple of weeks, I knew I could trust this cheeky Turk with my life. Resolutely gathering every ounce of courage stored inside me, I stood tall. "Okay," I said, smiling. "Let's do this." Hakan grinned as he bent down to help me put my feet through the elastic leg holes and zip me up to the neck, patting my still quivering bottom as he finished. Then he handed me a crash helmet. Crash helmet? Why do I need a crash helmet? He wasn't planning to crash, was he? Besides, if he does manage to screw it up and we fall out of the sky from 12,000 feet, what good are crash helmets? That's actually a fair question, peeps. My tanned Apollo assured me it was only for safety during takeoff. "We can take them off when we're in the air," he told me, chuckling. He wrapped the harness around me, winking brazenly as he buckled the strap across my chest before reaching through my legs to secure the thigh straps. After he did a double safety check of both our harnesses, we walked over to the takeoff area and waited our turn. Only one pilot could take off at a time, and we arrived just in time to see Jamal glide gracefully into the air, his terrified passenger screaming as he realized there was no turning back. I resolved not to make a total ass of myself. I watched with interest as Hakan spread out his red silk wing on the mountain peak. He began rearranging all the coloured bits of string. What if it got all tangled up? For a split second, I wanted to run away, screaming blue murder all the way back down the mountain. I'd come this far, and I refused to give in to the fear. Isn't courage the definition of feeling the fear and doing it anyway? It was either courageous or fucking stupid. At that point, I wasn't sure. Hakan wouldn't kill me. Somehow, I knew that. Pushing terror back into my gut, I stepped forward while Hakan attached his harness to the billowing red canopy. Then he connected my harness to the front of his. He double-checked the connections, and we stepped forward together as one awkward, four-legged monster. The wind speed and direction were good. We were ready to go. "Are you ready?" he asked, looking over my shoulder with a grin. I could barely speak. I nodded instead. I was ready, all right, ready to go home. The canopy caught the wind and Hakan took off. "Okay, now, run," he shouted at the top of his lungs. Fueled by adrenaline, we took off like a huge gangly beast with four wildly thrashing legs. I closed my eyes and concentrated on the running. While my feet connected to the earth, I remembered this was the most important part of the takeoff. After the first 3 steps, it was easy, but now I was running hard and going nowhere. I couldn't feel my feet. "Sit down," Hakan announced. "We're flying." I don't know why I did it, but I chose that inopportune moment to look down. We were thousands of feet above the earth. I froze. Feeling a rush of heart-stopping panic, my brain freaked out. Blood raced to my heart and pounded loudly in my ears. I couldn't breathe. I thought I would die of fright. Every muscle in my body felt as if it were carved from stone. I was so terrified I couldn't move. My legs dangled motionless beneath me. Out of the blackness, my hero came to the rescue. "I'm here," he cooed in my ear. "You're safe with me." My body responded slowly. I breathed deeply, gathering miniature shreds of pride with each intake of cool thermal air. "You can sit down now," he whispered. "Hook your thumbs behind you and slide into the harness like I showed you." I nodded stiffly, indicating I understood his instructions. Still frozen, I concentrated on the horizon. "Enjoy it. Trust me, we're safe," he crooned, breathing hot air into the back of my neck. Finally, I pushed my thumbs underneath the straps and slid the harness underneath my scared stiff butt. Still fighting against my fear, I continued to breathe deeply. As the seat molded neatly into my body shape, I realized it was quite comfortable, like sitting in a lounge chair. Behind me, Hakan's knees rested firmly on either side of my hips. The pressure of his body so close to mine gave me a sense of security, as if we could never fall out of the sky as long as he was there. Once we were in the air, it had taken less than a minute for me to begin to relax. It felt like an hour. After a few more mind-clearing breaths and my mental "don't be such a suki la la" pep talk, I became aware of my surroundings. We were gliding through the thermals above the mountain. The takeoff point was a tiny pinpoint hundreds of feet below us. I watched in amazement as tiny spots of colour floated in the breeze like thrown bits of confetti far below our feet. Time stood still. My Turkish friend instructed me to take off my helmet. As I passed it back to him, I saw he had already removed his. We enjoyed a few minutes of sightseeing, gazing at the coastline stretched out for endless miles on either side, and marvelling at the rugged mountain ranges rolling back into Turkey's heartland. Hakan pointed out some of the landmarks. Lost in the dream world of vistas, I almost forgot about the camera I had slung around my neck. For 45 minutes, we slowly drifted back to earth, talking and laughing all the way. In between giggles, I snapped photos of my feet dangling high above the lake at Belcheger's beach and admired the breathtaking views of nearby Butterfly Valley and Fethiye before we floated towards Aludeniz. It was far too soon to land. I could have stayed up there for hours more. As we raced toward the landing spot on the beach, Hakan told me to stand up. I stretched my legs out and slid forward. The harness slipped behind me. In a moment, we stepped out of the atmosphere onto the sandy beach as gently as a feather landing on a cloud. The most exhilarating ride of my life was over. Suddenly, I was surrounded by scores of lusty bronzed Turks, all unclipping and unzipping my harness and flight suit. Hakan stood nearby, grinning as he undid his own harness. "You were wonderful, perfect, you did great," he said before he went to gather his crumpled red canopy from the sand. In moments, the men had removed the harness and stripped off the blue flight suit. "I gotta go back up. See you later," Hakan shouted. Then, as fast as they appeared, they all vanished, and I found myself standing alone on the beach. Someone nearby gruffly ordered me to get off the landing pad. Another pilot was due to land in a few minutes. The next time I saw Hakan, a cute blonde was gazing into his eyes, nodding absently, and giggling at something that was obviously extremely funny. A few weeks later, one of the paragliding companies said they were short-handed. They asked me to fill in as a sales rep. I became so adept at selling paragliding rides, they offered me a full-time job. For the rest of the summer, I flew off the mountain every few days and also became the company's photographer. The last time I saw Hakan, he was falling out of the sky. He performed a too hasty wing over, following a neat spiral, and his red canopy had collapsed in midair. Scores of gasping spectators on the beach watched in horror as he yanked the yellow emergency chute with a split second to spare. Hakan and his terrified female passenger plunged into the sea, shaken but alive and amazingly unhurt. Oops! Not long after that terrible incident, I watched heart in mouth as another pilot missed the landing area by miles and bomb dived straight into a tree, breaking his passenger's leg. They might be tall and handsome and able to charm the pants off half the girls in Aludinese, but it was about then I began thinking it would be safer to stay away from Turkish paragliding pilots and keep both feet firmly on the ground. Besides, been there, done that.
Hey there, love bugs! Welcome to the jungle! I'm Nancy Miarelli, your guide to the ecological and entomological, i.e. bug, wonders of Ecuador. With my master's in entomology and a passion for ecology and conservation, I'm here to take you on an unforgettable adventure through the mega diverse forests and more lush than you may have expected mountainsides of Ecuador. This year, I'm excited to offer 2 unique science-focused tours. Join me for a nature journaling course where we'll sit in the grass, sketch, observe, and reflect on all the creatures and plants that we discovered. Or dive deep into evolutionary theory on my evolution tour, where you'll see what you learned in a book that one time growing on the side of a tree. Ready to embark on a journey of discovery? Visit www.scibugs.info, that is Scibugs, SCIBUGS, to learn more or find me, Scibugs, everywhere on the internet. Let's explore Ecuador and all it has to offer together.
Not sure if that's an story. It could be. It was a really fun time, actually. It was a great summer. And I got so comfortable in the sky because we went up all the time, at least 3 or 4 times a week, that we'd take a joint up to smoke while we were flying, and we'd take snacks to eat in the sky. And I'd take photographs of the other pilots and their passengers as they were whirling around in the air and then landing on the beach. I really enjoyed that. It was fun. And I observed from the sidelines as many local boys hooked up with many tourist girls with barely a breath in between the turnover. Unless you're only out for a good time, that holiday romance was more than likely not what you thought it was. Have fun, stay safe, use condoms, and don't drink and fly. The Who Is This Crazy Hag podcast is created, written, read, produced, edited, and mixed and published by Ronnie. If you'd like to grab a copy of Wheeeeeeee, find the paperback on Amazon or email thewitchpod@gmail.com to get an ebook. Also let us know via email or on Blue Sky at The Witch Pod if you're reading in a book club or a group of friends so we can give you a shout out. Don't forget to tell us where you are in the world. Visit The Witch Pod on Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music and Castbox, and also Substack and Patreon. See you next week. Don't forget to grab a Mai Tai and sit in a hammock, because we're heading to Bangkok, Thailand to meet somebody really interesting.